the Shulchan and the Mizbeach, and in those psukim at the end of at the beginning of Perek Dal, at the end of Parshat Bamidbar, it says, "Miben 30 shana v'ad ben 50 shana kol ba latzava lasot melacha b'ol moed." That's how it describes Bnei Kahat. Then in this week's Parsha, when it says Bnei Gershon Gam Heim, it says Kol Haba Litzvot Tzava Lavod Avodah, right? That's Mishpachat Gershon. And then when you look at Bnei Merari, it says Kol Haba Latzava Lavod Et Avodat Ol Moed. So each one of them has their own description of what their job is, and each one of them has their own combination of Tzava, Haba, Litzvot Tzava, Lavod Avodah. And so the Zera Shimshon is bothered by each one of these combinations. And in order to start and introduce his explanation, the first thing that he said, he quoted a Rashi based in a Midrash that says that tzava, we usually say tzava means like some sort of massive, it's an army. Today we use it as an army, but it means a massive number of people. But right, tzva'am there doesn't mean multitude, right? So that's what we usually, these are chalavi for anyone who's concerned, making sure not to be machshil anyone. So usually we define tzva as multitude. Interestingly, and although I'm not going to start getting into politics, as I usually try not to, but in this case, Rashi in the Midrash, Rashi says that tzva means desire, longing, and passion. It says here, tzva means lashon chefetz, ratzon, v'ta'ava. That's what lashon tzva. Yeah. Yeah. Usually we describe and translate tzva as multitude, some sort of massive group of thing, whatever the group. Right. But here, Rashi, again, this is Rashi. Who am I to argue with Rashi? Rashi says that tzva means based on a word, based on a pasuk in Iyov. Yeah, it's also Aramaic. Tzva means ratzon. It means some sort of desire, and he says it means a desire. It means a longing, a yearning. And he's going to take, based on that, the Zera Shimshon is going to now do is plug in the word tzva, meaning ratzon or chefetz or desire. He's going to describe that each one of the mishpachot has a different level of desire in their avodah.
What was the original question?
The original question is, why does each one of the mishpachot have a different description of tzava, kol haba, kol ba, lasot melacha, lavod avodah, inconsistent, right? Even though there are three families that are meant to be doing the same role, meaning within Mishpachot Leviah. And then he quotes, and now this is where we're up to, he says, the Midrash Rabbah says that the Bnei Kahat, we know last week's Parsha, Hashem tells Bnei Yisrael, make sure to keep Bnei Kahat locked in so that we don't kill them. Right? Because what's going to happen is, God forbid, if they see the Kodesh or they disrespect the Kodesh, they're going to get karet. So Hashem tells them, make sure that we keep them focused. Right? Kabalat Kodesh v'metu, exactly. So the question is, Lama mazir alehem al tachritu, right? Why does Hashem warn them not to cause them to have karet, right? Meaning, what type of disrespect would this apply to if Kahat were careful? Meaning, the Midrash there quotes a Rav Shmuel Bar Nachman, who says Bnei Kahat understood their role and said, we understand what's going to happen if we don't do it respectfully. If we disrespect it, and we're going to still take it on. So if they knew that already, so then why would you tell them, make sure not to cause them karet? Like, you can't have it both ways. Either, right. So now he's going to explain, and he says, about 2 paragraphs in, on let me just see, Kuf Pei Hey, and I'll tell you exactly where right.
Top of the page.
Second paragraph. Yeah, second paragraph in the blue svarim there. And it says that they knew, that is, what happened is, in the order of preference, or in the order of reward, the reward for carrying the shulchan, carrying the aron, is the highest. We know that from the sefer with Sefer Malachim with David, right? He gets killed. But what happens with the person who does get the aron in his house? He gets rich. He gets very wealthy. That's just one example. But the reward for carrying the aron versus the shulchan and the mizbeach is much greater. The aron is much higher. So what would happen is, they say they would get. We know, I would hedge my bets. What's the highest reward? Carry the aron. What's the lowest reward? Shulchan and mizbeach. So they would run to carry the aron because they know that the money is great, even though its responsibility is high, right? So that's what he's saying here. V'chulan ratzin al aron lo tel schar, mitoch kach hayu merivin, mitoch shayu nuagim b'kalut rosh hayta shechina pogat bam. What would happen is if I know that the reward is highest with the aron, so I'm going to run to get the aron first. And what's going to happen is I'm going to run and try to beat out my friend, like it says in the Mishnah Yom Kippur, Yoma.
They used to race
Right, they race somebody's back. So here, right, and break their arm. So here it's the same thing. They would run, and because out of kalut rosh, meaning they were so focused on beating their friend out to get the thing that they would have kalut rosh, and then they would get punished. Amar Elohim Moshe Aselem Takana Vezot Asulahem. Right, that's why we have some sort of takana in pasuk Yud Tet. At the end of end of Parshat Bamidbar, we see what is the takana, what's the rules in place and the guide in place in order to put them to make sure that Bnei Kat stay focused. Now, what do we learn from this? Mikan nir'eh sheBnei Kat lo hayu olchim al dat lifrok et hamishkan kulo shezen nikra avodah dahainu ha'avodah she'ayta tzricha b'mishkan. We can learn from this that the Kahat did not approach their assignment, their role, with the proper intent. In other words, I know that my role is to dismantle the Mishkan, but in order to do that, right, they were focused so focused on the Aron that they didn't, right. Instead of and they approached their task. That's considered avoda, right? That was the avoda that means the full job. The full job is to take each one of the kelim, dismantle it from the Mishkan, meaning take it out of the Mishkan, wrap it properly in the tchelet cloth, right? That would be the Elahu Olchim Kulam Al Dad Lisat Aron Bilovadad. What would they do? They say is we know that our job is to dismantle the Mishkan, dismantling the out, right? The kelim. So our job is to dismantle the kelim. But if I know that the taking the Aron is the one that receives the biggest reward, so what am I going to do? I'm going to run for the Aron, and the other two I'm going to put aside. I'm going to zip past that one and run to the Aron. So what he's saying is that they had less interest to complete the task. They didn't do the avoda completely. Their avoda was not, their full avoda would be take all the kelim. But since they were so focused on the Aron, their entire avoda was incomplete. And now, if we look now, look what it says in the psukim of last week's parsha. Now he says, "Umishum hachi katuv la'asot melacha by bnei kahat." That's why it says la'asot melacha. They wanted to do a job, but not complete the role. They didn't want to complete the task. They wanted to do their job, right? That's why it says exactly. Melacha is I'm doing part of the task, a task, versus avodah, which is the entire role or task, right? So melachat achat bilvad hayu osim. Their interest was get the Aron, reach the Aron, finish the Aron, but their job was not velo avodah, and they didn't complete the job, right? Ve'od kra'am melacha, and they called it a melacha. They called it a burden, a task, right? If I have a task, what do I approach? I have a task on my list. I have to get it done. But if it was an avoda, if it was something that I really viewed as an avoda, what would I view it as? A real avoda. I'd get like uplifted by it. I'd be interested in doing it. And that's why he says.
When you talk about avodah and melacha, you got lametet avot melacha for Shabbat. So it's like tasks.
Yeah, it's things that we can't do or can do, right?
And
but
then avodat Hashem.
right. Right, but unlike melechet machshevet, melacha means you need to have some sort of focus on it to do it, to get it done, but it's not considered an avodah. And so that's why we have davening is an avodah shebalev, right? And that's why when we serve Hashem, we're doing the avodat Hashem. It's not like a melacha. It's not a thing checklist, right? So now he says, Kach hayu shekishem shemisha osem melacha ino osa otel el kedei l'arviach, kach hayu ratzim kulam et ha'aron el ha'aron kedei litol sachar. So he said, just like a melacha, a task that I have, if I know the task is going to make me money, I'm going to do the job, I'm going to get paid, I'm going to get it done quickly. So he says, the Zera Shimshon is understanding that the Kahat was approaching their entire job as a task. Their job was not an avoda, because if it was an avoda, they would really have an interest. And the words, he's saying, but you pick up in the words, when you look at the words melacha versus avodah, the melacha itself, the first time it mentions their job is, so their level of ratzon, is the least, is diminished. Now look, it says the fisha b'otam lacha sherotzim la'asot, and since the task, that is the one task that they had, the Bnei Kat wanted to perform, dahainu tinat aron, meaning carrying the aron, lo haya efshar lehem lizkot kulam ba, since all of them couldn't, right? By default, they only have 4 people who could carry. Let's say even 6 people who could carry it, right? So not everyone can reach it. So look what it says. Lachein ketiv kol ba. That's why it says kol ba without the letter hey. The pasuk indicates that anyone who arrives first, right, first come, first serve, right? Anyone comes, right? Kol ba, while the other ones, right, kol haba, right? So now you're going to get to understand the difference in a second. And mishalo zachaba, any one of those bnei kahat that didn't get to merit to carry the aron, right? Lo ayaratz l'shulchan hamenorah kol kach b'irtzon libo, right? He wouldn't run as quickly to reach the shulchan hamenorah. And that's why it doesn't say the word of litzvot tzava, the desire, right? They didn't have that the cheshek as much as we had at the other bnei Levi. Now he's going to put that into the second. Right? They were locked in on carrying one object, which is the aron. Right? So now we understand that the reasoning behind bnei kahat's, the words themselves, according to the Zera Shimshon, indicate kahat, even though yes, they understood the ramifications of their role, which is that if they lose focus, the karet they might be punishable with karet. It's clear that they were doing their entire job as a malacha and not as avodah, and that's why in the first time it's mentioned of what their role is within this within this taking apart and dismantling of the Mishkan, their job is viewed as malacha, and it's also mentioned as kol bala malacha. Kol bala malacha, excuse me. Pasuk. It says, and now if we look at the words, now you put a plug back in, it makes sense. It says kol bala tzava lasot malacha. Right? It doesn't say litzvo. It doesn't say litzvo tzava, and it doesn't say la'avod avodah. They view it as a malacha. Now we have to understand. Now we got to now Gershon Mari, exactly. And now one of the things, interestingly enough, which is not mentioned in Zera Shimshon, but on Tuesday night when I was doing with my other chavruta, I said, now we can understand where if we look later on in this lovely sefer of Sefer Bamidbar, who is from Bnei Kahat? Koach. Koach is from Bnei Kahat. Bnei Kahat, we learn from the Bitim. What do we know about education? Education comes from home. Where is Bnei Kahat? Bnei Kahat is the child of Levi, right? Bnei Kahat is then you have Ben Yitzhar, Ben Kahat, right? You have Yitzhar as the son, and then you have Korach is the grandson of Kahat, right? Now, what do we know about the malacha? Their approach to everything was, it's not so important, right? When parents have to model for their kids. If the parents don't model for their kids what you want their kids what you want the desired outcome, the kid is going to do the same thing. So when the parents say we view this as a task, we view this as just a burden, and if I can't do the whole thing and I view it as a burden, it's just something off the checklist. Guess what's going to happen with Korach? Korach is going to say, hey, I can get a better job. Hey, maybe I could get a better role. I can squeeze my position in. Because Korach is learning from the person above him, from his grandfather who said, hey, it's just a task. When I go into, right, how do we approach our avoda? Do we approach our avoda with, it's a burden? Or do we approach our avoda with avoda? And therefore people are going to see the passion and see something out of it. And now, based on that, now it says, Umi shalo. So now he says, Bnei Gershon, Sha'af heim hayu nosim dvarim yoter kedoshim bnei Merari. Right? If we look, Bnei Gershon, who says in this week's parsha, it says they were also carrying, just like Kahat, were carrying things that were certainly, let's call it more. I don't want to say on a higher level of kedusha because the entire Mishkan was higher, but according to the Kli Yakar, not the Kli Yakar that we know, but a different Kli Yakar that was written before the one that we are familiar with, it says that the role of Merari, what's the role of Merari? To carry the krashim, to carry the adanim, right? All the amudim, all these things. And since that is what completes the Mishkan, meaning that's what makes it the structure that is the Mishkan, so according to the Kli Yakar, he says that is their role of importance is on level 2, meaning Kahat is number 1 because they carry the Aron, the Mishkan, the Aron, the Menorah, and the Shulchan. Level 2 is Merari because they carry the amudim and everything that completes the structure. So they're on level 2. And now he says, "Kamosha metzinu shegam heim nosim arov b'katev." If we look at, we find that Gershon is just like Kahat. Kahat is carrying most of their stuff on their katef, on their shoulders, because out of respect for the kedusha of the kelim. And now he says, we look at Gershon. Gershon was also carrying most, even though they had 2 carts, most of their work was on the shoulders. Most of their responsibility was carrying things on their shoulders. Shari Moshe lo natan el shtei aglot. According to Gemara and Sota, it says that the Gemara and Sota says that Moshe gave them two. They understood that the weight of the krashim and amudim was too much, so they gave him 2 wagons. But most, if not all, of their work was done on their shoulders. So it says Livnei Merari Natan Ari, but Merari, right? So Merari is the lowest level. So Merari gets 4 because they have other things that are obviously either heavier or less logistically possible, or I guess viable, to carry it only on shoulders. And that's why it says the word gam them as well, meaning that the Gershon had a similar in sense to that of Kahat. They were also relatively prominent, meaning if in order of prominence it goes Kahat, Gershon, Merari. Kahat was the highest because obviously they were the ones that carried the most important kelim. Then Gershon, and that's based on the word Gamheim, them too, right? And now we can explain. It says Umasam shel bnei Gershon haya kula shaveh. Right now, if we look at the sons of Gershon, the bnei Gershon, what do we know about? Everything they carried was of equal importance. Right? They didn't have, this keresh or this amud or this vav is more important, less important. Everything has equal significance. Right? Nothing on their role had more significance or less significance. And therefore, like we know with what we said before, Bnei Kahat, they had the Aron. The Aron was viewed as the most important and the one that would provide them with wealth and sustenance, meaning the person who carries it. So therefore, everything in the role of Gershon was considered equally significant, and therefore it says, and there was no one fighting or vying for the one kli over another kli to carry it. So it says, Lachen amar kol haba litzvot tzava kulam baratzon shaveh lavod avodah hainu kol avodah. Their job, their level of interest, their level of desire to do their entire avodah, unlike Bnei Kahat, who said we're viewing it as a malacha. Here, everyone had litzvot tzava, means to desire. They had a real yearning to do the complete avodah. And since the Gershonim since they had a task that was just as or almost as prominent as Bnei Kahat, right? It says the terms kol haba means anyone who comes, right? The idea that anyone who came, whether they were early or late, they had a task that was desirable, a task that they were interested in. And since all of their tasks were equally prominent, the double expression of litzvot tzava indicates that they also had a great desire to do it. And so, and finally, the term avoda is also appropriate since they came with the desire to complete their entire task and not just for the sake of reward. Meaning they didn't look at it as, I got to get it done, so therefore I'm viewing it as a malacha. Rather, they had their avoda was a level of avoda that was higher, since they had a strong desire to complete the task, complete the job, and their intention with doing the job was at a very high level. And now we have the third one, which is Bnei Merari. When you look at the Bnei Merari, the sons of Merari had the task that was, let's call it, on level 3. Right, and since most of their work was done with wagons and not on their shoulders, enomer litzvot tzava. Right, the Torah does not say litzvot tzava of double expression of desire, because their level of desire is going to be lower because they don't have to do it. Right, because their desire was to complete the task was lacking because the status was lower. Right, if they see that where in relation to Kahat or Gershon, Merari is on the lowest level. But nevertheless, even though they realized that maybe we're on tier 3 in terms of the level of desire, they still wanted to do it. And therefore, lachen k'tiv haba, that's why the word haba, anyone who comes, right, it's teaching us that anyone who came had an equal task. La'avod et avodat is to teach us that avodah implies that the entire job. And a job that is not done for some other ulterior motive, like what we said with Kehat. And it doesn't say kolba, which implies that some people had a more desirable task, like the Aron, and less desirable task, meaning that while Kehat desire was limited to only one aspect of the job, which is to carry the Aron, the Bnei Merari had performed all of their tasks with equal desire, equal ratzon, and that's why it says litzvo kol haba litzvo. It says here Bnei Merari. Kol haba latzava, anyone who comes, la'avod et avodat omer, means anyone who comes to their tzava. Anyone who comes, they will had equal importance. La tzava, meaning to the desire. La avoda, meaning they would complete their task. So each one, now we can understand that each one of the Bnei Levi that comes in, that had a responsibility to carry and to do part of the dismantling and carrying of the Mishkan, each one of them, the words implies and the words teach us something about their level of desire and like I said, it may even teach us something about how their children and grandchildren approached not only the melacha in the Mishkan, but also approached their avoda in general. Maybe avodah Hashem, as like proven through Koach, you could see that Koach himself was challenging the overall role, because he said, if I don't have respect for my entire role and I view it as a task, then I can disrespect or I can challenge the overall order of things in a way that may not necessarily be the right way to do it. And therefore, what happens? What do we know about Koach? He gets burned, right? A person who messes up with the avodah or doesn't do the avodah with full passion is going to burn him down and burn him down. It doesn't mention that the Zera Shimshon does not mention that, but I added that point because it does definitely teach us something about how we should approach avodah in general, how we should approach the mitzvot and avodah Hashem in general, but also more importantly is teaching us that each one of the words that describes the Bnei Levi also teaches us about how their approach was overall and their desire to complete the melacha. I'll pause here for a few seconds. Can I stop?